Hello and welcome to Off the Wall with Bridgeman Images, a series that invites you into the minds of artists and creatives who are pushing the boundaries of where art can be found. I'm Alea Dovetti, and today we are thrilled to celebrate the intersection of fine art and commercial publishing with the winner of the 2025 Bridgeman Images Book Cover Award. We're especially delighted to be hosting this conversation right now as our call for entries for the 2026 edition of the awards is now officially live. Bridgeman Images has had the privilege of collaborating with our guest and the wider Penguin Random House team on numerous iconic covers over several decades, sourcing the visual history and art that informs their designs. We're honored to be joined by a designer vital to bringing countless literary narratives to life, Maddie Partner, senior designer at Penguin Random House. Welcome,
Hi.
Maddie.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So I wanted to start by discussing Green Frog, which obviously was the winning cover of the 2025 awards. And Green Frog is a brilliant collage of four historic early 20th century botanical and butterfly illustrations. Um, what drew you specifically to use historical assets and these specific historical assets?
For this composition, I knew I really wanted to create a collage, something that's like colorful and bright, but sometimes using photography, I feel like it's not as maybe warm as an illustration. And I also think with illustrations like these, the colors pop a bit more and they kind of have a certain charm to them and texture that you can't get in a photograph. So that was why I started looking at fine art specifically for this. And um, more generally, like this is a short story collection that's about like it's about young women and also some bugs. And a lot of the stories involve a bit of magic, magical realism, and the natural world is really important. So I wanted to kind of bring that into the cover. And since there were so many creatures featured within the book, I thought it would be fun to bring in some butterflies and cicadas and other, the dandelion, some elements that were featured in a couple stories and create something that's like really magical and alive feeling.
Oh, it's really fun. I mean, it's really interesting because those works were created as scientific documentation. So to take it from that kind of scholarly context and basically transform it into something that is a commercial product. How what was your mindset in being able to kind of recontextualize it?
Um, you know, I feel like also I know that the butterfly illustrations were scientific, but that was not really top of my mind, though I appreciate how accurate they are. Um, But I think it's really exciting. Like that's kind of part of the joy of using Bridgman's collections. You kind of stumble across scientific illustrations, fine art, and like these old lithographs and stuff that you might not normally see. And I think like more generally, repurposing something like that, it creates a new life for these pieces and helps people view them in a way that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. And I also think these beautiful illustrations, while originally created for, scientific and observational purpose, they are absolutely beautiful. And it's kind of an honor to be able to kind of reuse them and feature them in a piece of, I guess, commercial fine art.
Yeah, commercial fine art is a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
So one of the judges noted that your design creates a clever dialogue between image and text. So how did you use text to kind of modernize 20th century illustrations so that it speaks to someone who's scrolling Amazon in 2026?
Yeah, certainly. I feel like the idea of scrolling, that's very important to us. And this is a paperback original book. And generally with paperbacks, we always want the type to be really big. We want them to be legible at a small size so they stand out. Um, and with this, I knew the collage would kind of be at the forefront, but I still wanted the type to like be really big and exciting. And I think the design itself is a bit more like poster designy,
Mm.
um, in that like everything is quite large. And so with the type specifically, like I wanted something that was a bit elegant. I think the serif here, it's more of a modern serif. And it was elegant and it has beautiful flow between the thick and thins of the typeface. So that kind of elevates the collage a bit and also I think helps it feel a bit more contemporary. Like it's not, Garamond or Caslon, which, were drawn like 300 years ago.
Or
Um,
God forbid, Comic Sans.
yes, oh my God. I think I would be murdered if I ever showed a cover with Comic Sans on it or laughed out of the room. But um and yeah, all caps, like I wanted the type, even though it's large and all caps, it is kind of like screaming at you a little bit. I wanted to use a lighter weight of the typeface, so it was still somewhat recessive, and the collage itself really takes your attention. Um, and even in some earlier versions of this cover, like the
Yeah.
author's name, Gina's name, was not as prominent. I was trying to see what I could get away with. Um, and it was kind of like a darker gray. I think you might have a slide of it, but
Yeah, I think you kindly shared a few of them.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
these were some of my other cover comps that I showed, but here, like Gina's name was much more recessive. And I probably even had an option that I didn't show where the title was also in that kind of like darker gray color, but I figured, they do want people to read it, so I couldn't get away with that. But yeah.
It's so fascinating seeing the four different I mean, not even treatments, just different designs laid out in front of you because as someone who doesn't work in publishing, you think that book covers are really just choosing an image, choosing a font, putting that um, into Photoshop and clicking send, but you can see that the balance and the image choice is it really makes a huge impact.
Yeah, and with this book, it feels, you know, quiet, contemplative, yet full of life and full of like mystery in a way, like the mysteries of life, which sounds a bit woo-woo, but um and I kind of wanted to like focus on that with the art that I selected. And I think perhaps the first and fourth of those four that we showed were also from Bridgeman. And while they do have a lot of color and life in them and focus on the natural world, I think they also have kind of a poetic quietness that I was drawn to and wanted to kind of mimic in the type treatment as well. And the third cover, I think, is a piece of fine art that I stumbled upon from elsewhere. But yeah.
Oh, it's pretty incredible. I think looking at these and then thinking about some of the other covers that you've done, um, I know you worked a lot on Maggie O'Farrell's repackages using art by Charles Vincent Lamb and Eric Revilius. When you're designing a cover for an established title, what is the commercial imperative? Are you designing to attract new readers or signaling a new edition?
For these, we were definitely trying to attract new readers. The type treatment is taken from the UK edition of The Marriage Portrait, which, was a big book for us after Hamnet, and we liked their type treatment and thought it would be a nice way to kind of carry it to our backlist because all of these books had different looks. And I believe after you'd gone, we had also just never published in the US. So we were kind of bringing some new books to the market and also just refreshing some of our previous titles with her. Um, and, this process was quite time consuming. We went in a lot of different directions. But I think in the end, some of these covers, like This Must Be the Place and Instructions for a Heat Wave, we wanted to focus more on the landscape and setting, which kind of takes a bit of a larger role in the story. And for After You'd Gone, and My Lover's Lover, we were kind of just thinking of maybe a piece that represents the emotion or the mood more of the book, rather than a specific place.
It's fascinating because obviously these are different artists and different artworks, but they all seem to have that consistent tie through it. Are you,
Yeah,
what are you looking for when you're designing a book that you know is going to be a series and it's a commercial series, so there has to be some sort of consistency between them, but you're using different sources?
I think with these, I was certainly looking mostly for painted works. Though I think that Revilius drawing is a drawing. But something where the colors are overlapping in a softer way and they have a similar sense of texture and style. I think these kind of, they are all different artists, but they do look somewhat of a piece and they have that artistic mark of the medium that the artist used. And then, generally I'm always looking for a piece that has place for type. And for these books, I knew Maggie's name would be really large. And a lot of these titles are also quite long. So I needed a piece where it was okay that I covered up a good chunk of it with type. And, luckily with Bridgeman, a lot of your works are already cleared to kind of modify and cover in that way. And so that's always great. But yeah, these had a lot more copy on them, I think, than some of our other covers. So, and big type, we were like, it needs to be as big as possible. So I was looking for things, that had a subject and a texture, but weren't too busy and, had some good contrast because we also knew the type was all to be in white. So I wanted the art to be dark enough to have good contrast with the type.
Of course. So I guess on the contrary of the looking at and working with contemporary artists, if we look at your other cover for which uses the Edward Hopper Morning Sun, if we could bring that one
Mhm.
up. Um, how do you prevent the painting's kind of existing cultural meaning from overpowering the book's narrative? And how do you make the art serve the text, especially with something so iconic like a hopper? There's already preconceived notions around the work. Um, so how do you make sure that that ultimately is serving the text on the cover?
Yeah, I think with this piece, it was really important that we crop it. I personally find the woman's face like the most recognizable to me, or kind of just the composition as a whole. And so cropping it helps draw attention to like a smaller detail that both kind of course, I do not think it anonymizes this painting since it's so iconic and recognizable, but it kind of helps you notice something that maybe you wouldn't have noticed about the painting in the first place. And in the case of this book, like it is a memoir, and I think with memoirs, we often use fine art on them, but it can be challenging, I think, and maybe a little confusing if you use a piece of fine art with a person's face on it, and that person is not obviously the author. So um, that was helpful in that sense. But I loved this piece, and I loved the sense of contemplation that it has. And I thought it really fit with Suzanne's memoir, which a lot of it takes place in New York City. Um, so I thought the view out the window was perfect. And I personally, I was very happily surprised that we were able to get away with this. From such a well-known artist, sometimes they won't let us crop a painting. But they were very, very kind and let us go for it. So that was exciting.
And it's interesting as such a contrast to what you were saying about the Maggie O'Farrell paint books, um, that the image that you're choosing really serves a totally different purpose.
Yeah.
And then it's up to you to kind of change that. And I think it's interesting with the last book that we looked at, which used the hopper. Um, it's a single image, and I think with book cover designers, I imagine it's really difficult to find that one perfect image. And you think it's that one perfect image. I imagine you go through a lot of others. What does your
Yeah.
process usually look like when you're just starting your search?
Yeah, that can be challenging. And like sometimes I don't know exactly what I want. Like sometimes I'm like, do I want a painting? Do I want a print? Do I want a photo? Like or some a weaving. I think I've put a weaving on a cover before. I'm like, I don't know what I want, and so I need to just look. And that can be challenging. Like I love browsing Bridgeman, of course, and sometimes I'll try and just search random adjectives that kind of fit the vibe of whatever book I'm working on. And I'll do that kind of across image platforms. I'll just like type in random, somewhat relevant words and kind of see what pops up. Um, but then sometimes, like if I know I want a figure or a landscape, I'll just kind of start there and do a lot of scrolling and hopefully stumble upon something. Or sometimes I'll stumble upon an artist and maybe the piece that I saw isn't exactly what I want, but I think their style is quite interesting. So I'll look and see what other works they've done, or look up artists who are maybe similar in style to them, or we're working at the same time. Yeah, but it can be tricky. And also, like, with the Maggie O'Farrell books, I was looking for a piece of art that kind of was a little would be a bit more recessive. It was more color pattern based, versus like with Committed, the Edward Hopper. Like I knew I wanted the image kind of to be what was the emotional driver of the cover. But if I'm looking for something for like Maggie O'Farrell, I might be looking for something abstract or landscape, and that kind of also helps me figure out like what bucket I'm going in. But it's a lot of scrolling and like random searching, and also just like praying that you stumble upon something that works.
Find the perfect
And we
option.
also have yeah. And we also have a photo researcher in-house as well. So sometimes I'll ask for her help if I'm like really stuck. But if it's like a vibe I'm looking for, it's like I feel like I know what the vibe is and it's hard to communicate that to someone else. So
Mhm.
that's when I kind of get stuck in like scrolling and scrolling. Um, but it's fun. It's delightful because you always uncover new artists and new creatives whose work maybe I'll save for a different cover, even if it's not what I'm looking for now.
Yeah, I think not many people can say that doom scrolling is in their job description. So I think we're all a bit
Yeah,
envious
though
of
hopefully
that.
this is like happy scrolling.
Yes, exactly. But one of the things that you mentioned kind of throughout our conversation, but especially when you were talking about finding the perfect image, it's about finding an image. And I wonder why it's important for you to use art or use an existing image rather than creating your own or using digital design or, I hate to say it, but AI.
Yeah, it's not, I don't always look for an image. And sometimes I'm searching for an image with the express purpose of modifying it. Like with
Right.
the green frog cover, I was kind of searching. I was like, what can I use that I know that I can collage? And so I'll certainly look for images with that in mind as well. And like right now I'm working on a cover that I like know I want to create a collage for. So I'm like kind of trawling various stock sites, like looking for images that I can kind of cut apart. But yeah, sometimes I will actually illustrate for covers as well, but I kind of, know my own boundaries and I kind of know what I can try. And maybe for like, three options, I'm like, okay, I think fine art or a photo or something would work for this, or maybe an all type option as well. And then I'll save myself like one comp that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try something a bit out of my comfort zone, maybe like illustrate something or just do something a little wackier. And I always have saved that for whatever book I'm working on. I feel like I always like to have one like kind of fun option that's a bit different. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't work. But it's nice to kind of push myself in that way because I do think like if you're always just looking for someone else's image, especially something that's fine art, maybe that you can't modify, it makes it harder to kind of express my own perspective as a designer. So some books I'm like, okay, I can kind of express myself more, and some books you're like, okay. I need to focus on the book and what the book needs.
But I mean, it's pretty incredible how you're able to use existing images and put your own touch on it, like with those four butterfly and botanical illustrations that you built into something totally new. That's an art process and a practice in itself. That's pretty incredible. Um, but I guess kind of thinking about all of the different images that you've used and all the different covers that you've created that have really a different visual language. I know that you've worked with images sourced from Christie's, the Holborn collection, the Gambra collection, Reuters, contemporary artists. I'm sure I'm leaving a lot out. A lot of different diverse sources from auction houses to journalistic photography. Do you feel the need to have a consistent voice in your work or a consistent voice in the auction house to maintain a cohesive visual language, or is it really just serving the book that you are designing for?
I feel like I focus the most on serving the book that I'm designing for. So I think if you were to look at my entire portfolio, I think like all of the covers kind of look vastly different. And of course, there are books from different genres that have their own um, kind of like genre looks that we fall into. So I'll kind of go in that direction at times. But I like to think that perhaps with a discerning eye, you could notice like the way I consider type and negative space. Like I think kind of some of these more like maybe niche or subtle design elements and considerations
Mm.
are more of my calling card, but I certainly wouldn't say that I have a particular style. And I think I love trying something new on every book that I work on and like seeing what I can create and how I can push myself. So that's like part of the fun of my job, I think, for myself. Yeah.
Totally. And working with such different source material, if we could pull up that cover, that uses a photograph, which I know for trade publications is really tricky. And I know that you got express permission from Reuters to use this image,
Yes.
which is quite cool. Like, it's not something that you would expect outside of nonfiction to
Yeah.
use an image.
Yes. Well, this is nonfiction. This is an
Oh, sorry.
absolutely crazy book. Like it comes out next year. I highly recommend reading it. But yeah, this was, a fascinating problem for us, I guess, with this book because it's about Gloria Trevi, who is a very well-known Mexican pop star, and she's super popular today as well. But this focuses on her like birth as a pop star and a sex cult that she was involved with. Crazy stuff. But it's tricky. We were trying to balance like, do we want this to look like true crime? Do we want this to look focus more on like the element of like music, pop sensation, like kind of newsprint-y thing? And we had previously cleared a different Reuters image, I believe, with you all. But we had to switch directions because we wanted to go with something that looks a bit more intense and true crime. And yeah, it's very tricky with photos of celebrities and recognizable people to modify them in any way. So kind of before we started working on this new direction, we like came to you and we were like with Reuters, we were like, can we do this to these images? We had to make sure that I could kind of have some whether or I needed to know like if I had the freedom to, cut up her face a bit, make this image black and white, or if we had to treat it in a more straightforward way where maybe we just cropped it and there was no type over it or something. So this was very exciting for us to be able to do this to this picture. And I think it turned out pretty intense in a good way. So
Yeah, I mean, it's in the title, but it was very striking to
yeah.
me. I guess the use of photography, but then also the way that the cover is very clearly considered, and it's not just an image of the person that the book is about. So I find that really interesting and exciting and different. Was there any other forms of visuals, like historic or artistic paintings, illustrations, etc.? Obviously, we touched on the 20th century scientific illustrations, all the way up to a journalistic photography. What type of medium are you most excited to work with? And what do you find the most difficult?
I always love with working with things that are out of copyright. So I can
Yeah.
do whatever I want to them. But I also just have a soft spot visually for like, I guess like 19th century like screen prints and lithographs and scientific illustrations and stuff. I just find them very charming. And I love seeing in like the high-res images, like the texture of the original piece of art. So I love working with those. And then I do love looking at Bridgeman, especially. Like I do love working with like contemporary artists whose work, might not have been on a cover before. Um, and we cast a wide net when we're looking for new art that we put on covers. So I think that's like one of the most exciting parts of my job is if we get to use an artist whose work hasn't been featured on a cover before, and they're like really excited about it. I always find that really lovely. And that certainly also comes with challenges because they might have specific things that they don't want their art to either represent or like also maybe I shouldn't put type over this part of the art, like they don't want it cropped, etc. So you always have to keep that in mind. Most challenging, I think generally most challenging for me is just art by very well-known figures. I think my use of the Edward Hopper painting was both, well done. I think cropping it really helped kind of take it out of its existing context. And also, of course, we got it approved, but it always intimidates me if I stumble across a painting that I love that I think could work for a book. I think there is, if it's by Picasso, Miro, et cetera, it's like people will recognize that work and you have to think about what context they would then bring to the book or if that's something that you want with a title. And then also I am just kind of scared of clearing some of these pieces of art for use on covers. Like you have to kind of think about kind of how much you can get away with and if it is worth it in the end. So it's a balance I have to think about that I find challenging.
Well, it seems like you have quite an encyclopedic background on art now. I'm sure you've been able to encounter a lot of interesting movements and geographic locations of works that usually you wouldn't encounter. Do you think that your work as a designer has made you look at art a different way? Go to a museum, go to an exhibition, and you're looking for different things or approaching it in a different way?
Kind of. I think like I feel like when I was younger, I've always enjoyed figural painting and some styles of landscape, but I feel like after, going to design school and being and working as a designer, I enjoy like um fine art that incorporates like graphic arts in a way, like or I guess geometric abstract art I find interesting and I kind of view it through a different lens, where I'm thinking more about the constructural like elements of it, like what is forming this image, like negative space, positive space, balance. Like I'm kind of considering a piece of art, I guess, in a different way. Um, and I feel like now I have I often find like fiber arts more fascinating now. And like experimental letterpress works and stuff like that, where it's kind of taking a medium that kind of has an express purpose, with letterpress or typewriters, to express text and word on a page, and changing it and using it in a different way where it's more abstract and maybe creating a pattern or a unique design I find very fascinating. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned kind of text and balance and space, because I know that you studied Korean language and history. Um, does studying design outside of a Western tradition impact the way that you make certain aesthetic choices?
I think, um, unfortunately, I'm not sure how much Korean design I've actually been able to study, but I think even having that exposure to a different culture and a different language, I feel more, maybe a little more knowledgeable and okay, like kind of exploring that visual culture on my own now, and kind of bring some context to it. By no means a complete understanding, but and I also think even just learning Korean language and understanding how, a character or a word is formed, it's very different from how English is constructed. And I think it's more, I think it focuses more when you're considering a specific character. Korean is designed in a very uh, specific way to be easy to learn and easy to understand and write. And I think that is an idea that kind of transfers over to how I design, where I want something that's like clear and easy to understand, while also kind of maintaining like what I consider like a very elegant letter form. And I think it's interesting to also study a language that's kind of character based, and kind of consider that more from a design perspective rather than like reading, and consider it as a visual object rather than a method of communication, I think is helps kind of widen your perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. It's such a beautiful alphabet and language. So I could see how that harmony and balance definitely translates. But as we're starting to wrap up now, I wanted to leave it on asking you if there's trends in contemporary cover design that you're really excited for and one that you would like to see disappear.
I feel like the biggest trend that everyone is talking about is like neon type over a painting of a woman at rest or unrest. Um, which, I kind of like as a trend generally. I do think now it's challenging because you want your cover to look unique, and eye-catching. And when everyone is kind of used to this look, you're like, okay, this is a great painting. I want to use it, but how can I incorporate the type in a way that's feels fresh and new? So, I'm 50-50 on it. I love using fine art and figurative paintings, but it has, I think, become more of a challenge than maybe it once was. And but it's also funny because it's become a way to signal genre. And so sometimes we're just asked for it and or asked for something similar to it. So you have to put your thinking cap on a little more. Um, and yeah, I think a trend that is becoming bigger and that I often work within is they want the type to be really big and really legible so that it can be read at a small size when you're looking on your phone or scrolling on Amazon. And I think I would like that to be less important. Um, I think I love using smaller type. I love using like a light type face weight where it's less bold, something that's more delicate. And I found that harder and harder to get away with. So I hope people would consider the book as an object, a physical object, a little more, and how that might be a good thing. And we can get away from the screens.
Well, that is a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much, Maddie, for joining us. And again, from last year, congratulations on your cover, on a fantastic work. Um, and I wanted to say for anyone watching that would like to get involved with the our book cover awards this year, The applications are open through the 30th of December. If you are interested in learning more or applying, you can go to our website and find out more. But thank you so much, and I can't wait to see the new covers that you have coming out soon.
Awesome. Thank you. This was a great conversation. I had a blast.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all for joining.
Bye.